Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm Craig Kassar, the Ward 12 Councillor. Really appreciate the great turnout here today. As you can read on the screen, we're having a town hall today on planning and development. I'll provide some introduction overall on housing, and then we have a great complement of staff here who are going to go through a number of slides speaking to development at a high level. We're not going to get into any specifics on developments in detail. This is meant to answer a lot of the questions that we've heard through email, in person, phone calls around development, and just there's a lot of questions we hear. So we want to try to fill in some of those gaps so you're educated. And at the end, we'll also remind you how you can get involved as development applications come through. Yeah, and if you don't mind checking to make sure your phone's off, that'd be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, we'll start with the land acknowledgement. Actually, it's last week on the weekend was Indigenous Peoples Day down at James Street Plaza. I was down there. It was a great celebration. So we acknowledge that the city of Hamilton is situated on the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas of the First Credit. And our own little bit that we add here, as we work to the plan for the future of Ward 12, we do so with the wisdom and guidance of Indigenous people in mind, so we can better understand our role as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. And it's good to share land acknowledgement, but I think it's also important to get involved. If you're not aware, the Dundas Valley at the HCA has just, what happened there? Has just unveiled a new sign exhibit along the main loop. So if you're looking to learn more about Indigenous culture and what was here before us, that's a great way to do it. And another one is a new book by local author Daniel Coleman. I'm in the midst of reading that. It's called Grandfather of the Treaties. And it speaks about the covenant chain two-row wampum that the Dutch and the Haudenosaunee first established. It was passed on to the French, the British, and then the government of Canada. And it goes through that history, very easy read and great history. So I'd encourage you to find your way to participate through the path to reconciliation. So here's the agenda. I'm going to go over some ground rules and, like I said, a brief housing overview. Then we'll get into the meat of it from a number of staff. And then I will talk about how you can get involved. Maybe some of you know already, but it'll be new information for some of you. And then at the very end, we'll have questions, and we'll have folks come up here to ask questions through the microphone so that everyone in the room can hear it. And staff will do their best to answer your questions, and we'll see how that goes. So speaking to ground rules, as I just mentioned, please hold your questions, make a note or remember them, and hold it to the end of the meeting. And instead of raising your hand, like I said, just come up to the microphone. Let's just be respectful. I know planning can be a passionate topic. There's different opinions for sure, but just let's keep it all respectful. And I want to highlight that this is a general information session. It's not a planning or public meeting on any particular development. We're going to mention, and we'll have updates on a couple of the big ones on Wilson Street, but the intention is not to debate those or go into details. There's different times and places for that. This is a kind of planning 101 overview. And we will end at 8 p.m., but we'll remain behind for a little bit afterwards for any individual questions. Okay? So when we're talking about planning and development, what are we planning for? Housing is probably the first thing that comes to mind, but there's a lot of other things that are considered. It's transportation, jobs, public spaces, places where you can go, the health of the population, how to make it vibrant so businesses thrive, people enjoy. Happiness, something that's not talked about a lot, but when we design a place, kind of want it to be somewhere where we can be happy. And also, we're designing for the future. So meeting the needs of today, but also meeting the needs of the future. So land use decisions are the single biggest thing that can have the most impact for what we decide at council. It's a key driver of financial viability and affordability for the city. So when we're talking about taxes and how much revenue we come in, how much things cost, land use has a huge, huge impact on that. And it really is the one asset that we can control. And as I think will come up through this conversation, through changes at the provincial level, we have less and less control over the last few years about how land gets used. But we'll get to that a little later. So unless you haven't been paying attention, you know that we are in a housing crisis. And there is a housing continuum, which I have on here. So most of us are probably somewhere up here in home ownership and private rental, but there's a whole host of things here from homelessness services, emergency shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, community or social housing, and then below market rental or ownership, which we would call affordable housing. So when we're talking about development and planning, We're talking about all of these things. Yeah, so that's what I just spoke about. And it is a top priority of Hamilton. I'm going to speak about what Hamilton is doing, because that's probably one of the questions I get most often. Well, what is Hamilton doing about housing? And I'll speak to that. But at a headline level, there is a whole of Hamilton approach. There's a housing secretariat that was hired this term of council to oversee everything, whereas previously things were maybe siloed a little bit. The housing secretariat looks at the whole portfolio and drives that across the entire spectrum. And before I get to what we're doing, I also get a lot of questions about affordable housing, and thought I would point out that there actually is affordable housing in Ancaster. It's on the left side of the screen there in the red circle. There's 2 affordable housing units, City Housing Hamilton on Fiddler's Green, and the rest of the dots show where other affordable housing units are across the city. So there is affordable housing in Ancaster, and as we look at where affordable housing can be, we take a full city approach to it. So what is the city doing about housing? First of all, I'll mention that housing actually is not a municipal responsibility. If you look at what the feds, the province, and the city does, housing is a responsibility of the province, although you wouldn't really know that by looking at the funding there. The dark blue is the 2025 budget, and the municipal investment in housing over $130 million, which is 68%. So, and that has grown significantly this term of council. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it is up tens of percents. And you can see on the right there where that investment is going. Affordable housing, tenant supports, social housing is a big one, shelters, and unfortunately encampments as well, and managing that process. But I'll also point out there, you see the provincial government, 15% of the funding. So funding from the province has basically been steady as our need has grown significantly. So the city has stepped up. That's part of why taxes have gone up. If you've read my newsletters, I've commented that in detail. We've had to make a decision on managing the housing situation and homelessness, and we've invested, and a little bit from the feds and other sources. So that just gives you an idea at a high level of the funding and the investment that the city is making. Continuing on, if you're following the housing sector, the private sector and building is basically stalled in 2025 with interest rates, tariffs, the cost of construction. There's a number of factors that have basically stalled private sector development. In the public sector, though, we are continuing. So you may have read a news story in the last couple of weeks about Hamilton is building 1,200 new homes over the next 3 years. Those are not-for-profit, working with partners. Like I mentioned, it's a whole of Hamilton. And there's the Hamilton is Home Coalition amongst affordable housing providers. And you can see there almost $18 million in 2025. And then annually, over the next 3 years, there's more than $14 million being invested in a bunch of different projects. Won't go through all the details on there. I've written about this in my newsletter, and you can find the news release from the city as well. So there's a whole number of projects across the city that we're tackling. There's also the Housing Accelerator Fund from the federal government. That's $93.5 million over 3 years. And the goal of that, starting last year, I think it was, is almost 2,700 units, some affordable, some market. There's a whole bunch of different paths there that the Housing Secretariat and the city as a whole is working on to generate more housing while the private sector is not doing much at the moment. I also wanted to talk real briefly about the impact of housing and built form. And when I say built form, I mean what kind of housing is there? All the way from single family or single detached single family homes all the way up to high rises. There's many different kinds of built form, and a lot in the middle that we don't see a lot of until recently. So that could be, mid density, 4, 5, 6, 7 stories. But because of our historical development, our asset management team just presented a report to General Issues Committee Council that we have a $5.2 billion funding gap over 10 years. So that's $522 million annually. And what that means is the amount of revenue that we need in order to maintain what we have is $520 million a year less than we are taking in. And that's primarily going back to what I said before about the way we use land and the tax productivity of land, which I'm going to talk about. And the biggest thing that we hear the most about, and it's been in the news last year and again last month, about the roads. And Hamilton has 2 of the worst roads in the province. And that's because we don't have enough money to invest. And that's built up over decades. So housing has a direct impact on the money we have in order to maintain everything. So this is a slide just on tax productivity. As I mentioned, land is one of the resources we can control, and that's how we derive our revenue. So we're not able to raise money through sales taxes or any other ways. We cannot run a deficit. So we have land and the property taxes. So how much land revenue we get from each acre is very, very important. And what is on here is it's from Urban 3, a consultancy in the States that focuses on the specialty on this topic. And on the left, on the y-axis, you have residential, mixed use, and commercial. And on the top, you have low density, medium density, and high density. And you can see the numbers there, which represent the revenue per building type and the net impact that it has. So mixed use is very, very a good way to generate the most revenue. That means we have the most money to fix our roads and to build nice things that we want in a city, whether that's rec centers or public art or a new art center or whatever it might be. So as we think about how we use our land, it's important to consider what generates the most money. And this is data accumulated from all over North America and certainly applies in Hamilton. And the bottom line here is low density housing does not pay for the operations and maintenance and replacement costs. So we all enjoy living, a lot of us, in single family homes. The bottom line is it actually doesn't pay for itself. So we need to find ways to generate more revenue. Okay, so I'm going to transition it over to staff now, and they're going to do the bulk of the presentation. I'll come back at the end, but I just wanted to clarify the role of staff versus council. So staff are professionals, they advise council. They must follow professional standards, they're bounded by provincial legislation, and they're required to follow council-approved policies, zoning, and official plans. The reason I specifically mention that, because I hear a lot of feedback on why staff are allowing something to happen, why they're recommending this. They are bound by all of these things I mentioned, and they do their job professionally. So if you have concerns about something, you can ask questions. Don't assume that staff are trying to move an agenda, because they are not. They're professionals and they're bound by all these codes and legislation. What they do is they recommend things in reports that are made publicly to council. At the same time, they're made public to everyone else. And it's council that will determine if we adopt a recommendation, deny it, or amend what staff present. Okay, so that's just a little bit of context there for the role of staff in municipal government. So now I'm going to turn it over to staff. We're going to go through a number of topics. Remember to hold your questions, and remember that this is a high-level Planning 101 information session. We're going to talk about some of the developments on Wilson Street, but the intention is not to get into the specifics. And if as those things develop, I will certainly be sharing that information, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I think Reno is going to start, and I'll let staff introduce themselves as they come up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Julian Falvello. I am the manager of development planning for the East team. Make you aware that the city of Hamilton for development planning is divided into two sections for the city. We have East team and a West team. Ward 12 falls under the West team, and the manager for that section right now is unfortunately not available to come tonight. So what we have here is just our slide presentation, what we'll be discussing tonight. So our first thing we'll be discussing is official boundary expansions, applications, official plans, secondary plans, zoning, residential zoning projects, additional dwelling units in the urban and rural area, upcoming initiatives, natural heritage, tree protection in Ward 12. We'll be speaking about draft plans of subdivision, official plan amendments, site plans, and building permits. Project updates on the Wilson and Lorne project and the Wilson Street East project. I'd like to speak to the boundary expansion applications. So currently we have 4 applications received to date. One of them is the White Church lands. The second one is referred to the Alfreda lands. The third is the 159 and 160 Sulphur Springs Road, which is in this ward. And we have the 20 Road West lands. Now the framework for the boundary expansions were approved on April 16th of 2025. And there are peer reviews being done for these applications. Staff review them, plus we hire peer reviewers. For your information, though, the next steps for these application urban boundary expansions, we have a special planning committee meeting tomorrow for the White Church and Alfreda lands. For the Sulphur Springs, we have it on July the 10th, 2025. We have an open house, virtual open house, and the link is forthcoming. So please check the city website where that link is coming. And the statutory public meeting for the Sulphur Springs application is on September 9th, 2025. And also, if you go to the email notification under the urban boundary to request any additional information for that. So what we have here is the Sulphur Springs, 159, 163 Sulphur Springs urban boundary expansion request. It's 10 hectares in size. Current use is residential right now. The applicant is proposing 75 dwellings on a condominium road. We've received the application on December 19th, 2024. It was deemed complete by staff on January 15th, 2025, and it was appealed to the OLT on March 19th, 2025, and it was deemed complete by the OLT on May 26th, 2025. Now, the Sulphur Spring application seeks to expand Hamilton's urban boundary into the Greenbelt area and Niagara Escarpment Plan by approximately 10 hectares to allow development of 70 dwellings on a condominium road. The Sulphur Springs application was initially received on December 24th, as indicated. Staff deemed this application incomplete in January 2025, meaning that staff did not think the materials submitted by the applicant were sufficient to conduct a fulsome review. The applicant appealed this staff decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal in March, and the tribunal provided a decision deeming the application complete as of May 26, 2025, meaning that staff are now required to process out this application. City staff has circulated the Sulphur Springs application to internal departments and external agencies for comment and are beginning the review of the application at this time. As noted previously, a virtual open house, will take place on July the 10th. We ask you to attend that and share information about the application to the public, and a decision on the application will take place at the statutory public meeting held on September the 9th. So I'm going to be passing it over to colleague of mine, Neil, and he will go on next.
To make everything real cozy up here. So as Vito mentioned, my name is Neil. I'm a senior planner in the community planning group, and primarily I deal with secondary plans. So that's what I'm going to be here to talk about this evening. So the first slide we've got here, though, is just what is urban planning. So rearrange a little. So urban planning can broadly be described as a technical or political process that focuses on controlling and/or designing change and developments in the built and physical environments. So it's undertaken with the objective of improving communities and quality of life, ensuring orderly and safe growth and development, and protecting valuable resources such as land, water, air, natural features, climate, and culture. So how we actually do that, typically in this, wrong way. Going all over the place. Is through a series of documents. The first document generally that we deal with at the city is the official plan. So official plans are the overarching policy documents which outline the city council's position and how land in the city should be used. So typically official plans are dealing with issues such as informing the public of the city's land use planning policies, assisting communities understand how their land may be used now and in the future. They help decide where roads, water mains, sewers, garbage dumps, parks, etc. Will be located. They provide a framework for establishing and implementing the city's zoning bylaw, and provide a way to evaluate and settle conflicting land uses while meeting local, regional, and political interests or provincial interests, and determine where types of land uses, including housing, industry, office, and shops, will be located. So from there, within an official plan, are secondary plans. So secondary plans are prepared under the authority of the Ontario Planning Act, not as a standalone document, but as an amendment to the official plan. So secondary plans build on the objectives and policies of the official plan at a more detailed neighborhood or district level, allowing for local consideration to shape their policies. A secondary plan is designed to address a community's future needs and typically made up of principles which inform objectives. The policies of the secondary plan are then intended to guide development to achieve those objectives. Secondary plans are made up of principles such as protect and enhance parks and connections through trail and bike networks, maintain a strong residential focus, or enhance and protect heritage and cultural resources. So those are examples of principles that are found in secondary plans in Hamilton. So there are also the objectives, and those objectives might sound like to encourage design that promotes pedestrian walkability, physical activity, social interaction, and public gatherings. Or they might say, ensure that new development or redevelopment encourages a high degree of pedestrian prominence and appropriate access to movement for pedestrians. So to get to these principles and objectives, we have a series of policies. These policies lay the foundation for achieving those objectives, but it is also important to note that the secondary plan is not an implementation document. It often acts as a guideline for development and design, as it has language that suggests various design and land use requirements, but the implementation generally hits the road in the zoning bylaw. So here's a map of all the secondary plans that are in Hamilton. It's a little small there on the screen, but everywhere that's shaded in that sort of yellow beige color is an index of where those are, and there's just a list of some of those components that we might find. Then getting to that zoning bylaw, this is the regulatory document that's implementing our official plan, and then by nature, the secondary plans that are a part of that. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the next member of staff to chat more about zoning bylaws.
Good evening. My name is Lana Fulford, and I'm the supervisor of the zoning bylaw reform team. I'm here with Emily Coe, who's the manager of zoning and committee of adjustment. And essentially what zoning bylaw reform and what the team does is maintains the city's zoning bylaws. We are working towards having one comprehensive citywide zoning bylaw, and we're close to that, but we still are dealing with 6 former municipal zoning bylaws as well. So our team is responsible for maintaining those zoning bylaws, for introducing new zones or changes to zones, and implementing city initiatives. One of those I will speak to tonight. So additional dwelling units, that was a city initiative that was implemented through zoning. So as Neil got into, this is sort of where those land use policies hit the road in terms of the zoning bylaw. It implements those larger municipal and provincial policy documents, and gets into the specifics of the uses that are permitted on land and regulations related to the use of that land. So things like setbacks from a lot line, lot sizes, building heights. So I know this is a bit blurry, but these are some sort of typical regulations that you would find in a zoning bylaw. So there'll be regulations and definitions around grade of a property and height, and those typically work together to define the maximum height that is permitted on a given property. There's things like lot coverage and setbacks. So lot coverage and setbacks often work together to define that buildable envelope on a property. And setbacks are very important because they ensure there's some consistency along a streetscape, that there is adequate landscape area, space for drainage. And, you know, we can all relate to sort of a single family dwelling that would ensure that there's that rear amenity space in the backyard. So there really are a lot of components within the zoning bylaw regulating all forms of land uses. So what I wanted to focus in on tonight is what the zoning bylaw reform team has been spending a lot of time on over the last number of years. And that's the residential zones project, which we call reimagining neighborhoods. So as I said, there's a citywide comprehensive zoning bylaw that applies to the entirety of the city, and that is zoning bylaw number 05200. And over the years, we've been introducing new categories of zones into that zoning bylaw, and thus replacing those zones that existed in the former community zoning bylaw. So commercial zones, industrial zones, and so forth. We are working our way through the last set of zones, and they are the residential zones to be incorporated into the citywide zoning bylaw. And they do represent the greatest number of properties across the city, so it has been a fairly large undertaking. And we've essentially broken it down into 3 key phases. The low density residential zones. So those are zones that are found in the neighborhoods across the city. Mid-rise residential zones. And so zoning along the periphery of neighborhoods. So along those larger roads. And then high-rise residential zones. And so that's your highest density of residential development. I'm going to focus on the first 2 here tonight as the work for the high-rise residential zones is still to come. There has been 2 key objectives of the residential zones project. It's not only been about creating that new set of residential zones in the citywide zoning bylaw so that there's a consistent set of zone standards across the city, but it's also been about expanding the types of housing that is permitted in residential zones to provide greater housing option within neighborhoods across the city and along the periphery of those neighborhoods. So that first phase, the low density residential zones phase of the overall project is almost complete. We have introduced 3 low density residential zones that apply to neighborhoods across the city. And that replaced about 40 plus residential zones that if you collectively added up those zones across the former municipal zoning bylaws, that's what we were dealing with, each with slightly different permissions and associated regulations. So now we have 3 low density residential zones, the R1 zone, R1A zone, and R2 zone. They have the same permissions across all of them. They generally, the difference is the size of lot. So through this work, the permissions have been expanded in these zones from what was often just a single detached dwelling permission that has been expanded to the uses that you do see on the slide here. So single detached and duplex dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, triplexes, fourplexes, and street townhouses. So most low-density residential properties across the city now are permitted to contain up to 4 units. What this is intended to achieve is to remove the barriers of exclusionary zoning. So that has traditionally restricted the types of housing permitted in neighborhoods, often to just single-family dwellings. It promotes a more sustainable growth that makes use of existing infrastructure and services, so providing more opportunity for adding units. Provides more housing choice and more affordable housing options for residents, and then does provide more opportunity for different residents in different stages of life, and the opportunity to perhaps age in place because there are more housing options within your neighborhood. So one of the component that many people may be familiar with, and this does apply to those low-density residential zones, so the zoning within neighborhoods, is additional dwelling units. So there has been, over the last number of years, this incremental increase in housing choice in Hamilton's neighborhoods. It started with the introduction of additional dwelling unit permissions. They were initially called secondary dwelling units. It's essentially one and the same, but we have transitioned to additional dwelling unit as the term that applies. They were initially introduced as part of a pilot laneway housing pilot project in 2018, with the full introduction in 2021, and this occurred citywide permissions, including the rural area, for internal ADUs, so adding a unit within your residence, your house. And at that time, the permission included detached ADUs in the urban area. Here are some examples of what you might find. These are Hamilton examples. In February 2024, the most recent introduction of an additional permission was through extending the detached ADU permission to the rural area. And that is subject to a minimum lot size requirement to ensure that there is adequate space for providing the servicing needs on those lots. So as I said, here's some examples of more recent developments of detached ADUs across the city. Some of those, they're typically in a rear yard or side on a corner lot. You may find them on a laneway as well. And so here's a cross section. In terms of some of the more sort of the specifics of the permissions, I did indicate that through those changes through the residential zones project, that most low density residential properties are now permitted to contain up to 4 dwelling units. So if you sort of add additional dwelling units to the mix of permissions, how that is translated is up to 2 ADUs in a single detached dwelling if newly built, up to sort of 1 ADU in a duplex dwelling, 1 ADU in each semi-detached dwelling of an overall semi-detached dwelling unit within the dwelling, and then 1 ADU in a street townhouse dwelling. So those are sort of the internal permissions. We do provide sort of a distinction between a new 4-unit dwelling and then adding ADUs to an existing dwelling. We have specific regulations around a 4-plex, so a purpose-built dwelling with 4 units. And so when a proposal comes forward, it's subject to the specific regulations for 4-plexes. Otherwise, if it's an existing dwelling, you can convert that dwelling up to that 4 unit maximum. In terms of detached additional dwelling units, this slide just shows the typical configuration that you would see on a lot. So if it's an interior lot, there typically would find that a detached additional dwelling unit in the rear yard. There might be access via a laneway, but regardless, the primary access to that unit has to occur from the street line. Or there's the corner lot scenario. We have seen quite a number of examples where they may take a detached garage and convert that to contain an additional dwelling unit. So you can see there are a series of regulations. I don't suspect they're legible, but we can certainly, that information is available. We have a dedicated website. So there's regulations around the setback from the lot line, the size of that additional dwelling unit. It is secondary to the principal dwelling, and so therefore it has to be smaller in size. It can have a maximum height of 6 meters. And then there are separation distances, so a minimum of 4 meters between the principal dwelling and that detached ADU. Those are the key regulations around detached ADUs. So as I mentioned, there was sort of a two-stage approach to introducing permissions for ADUs in the rural area. And this slide summarizes those permissions. So one additional dwelling unit is permitted in 3 zones in the rural area. The A1 agricultural zone, the A2 rural zone, and then within settlement, rural settlement areas specifically, the settlement residential S1 zone. There is a minimum lot area requirement of 0.66 hectares. And then the most recent permission that was introduced to the rural area is the detached ADU. Same zones are permit that detached ADU. A larger minimum lot area requirement is in place. There is also the permission to convert an existing accessory structure, sort of similar to that example I provided of a detached garage. And the gross floor area of that detached ADU cannot exceed that of the principal dwelling. So in total, you could have 1 internal ADU on your rural property within the principal dwelling, and then 1 detached ADU. And then finally, as I mentioned, the second key phase within the overall residential zones project is dealing with mid-rise residential zones. So if you think of areas along the periphery of neighborhoods, along those larger roads, so thinking of sort of where there are more transit options and more services for the community. We are working towards introducing 3 mid-rise residential zones, and they basically just differ in scale. So one is more of a small scale, sort of townhouse permissions, and then you have sort of a mid-scale up to 6-story building permissions. And then the final mid-rise zone is proposing to permit up to 12 stories. So we are intending to bring forward those zones in the fall to council and apply those zones to sort of the first set of properties across the city. The zoning will be introduced across the city in phases. Oh, whoops. I should explain what they specifically apply to. So they permit, while residential is the focus, there are local commercial permissions within 2 of the zones. And so that would permit more mixed use buildings. Think of like ground floor local commercial. And it really is intended to provide more housing opportunities and more equitably distribute density across the city. And really as well, they do provide that opportunity for a transition in density, or a transition between what might consider a higher or a larger scale sort of high rise or commercial developments down to your neighborhood scale of development. So just a visual of those areas that we're focusing on for the mid-rise residential zones. And as I sort of mentioned what the built form could look like. So here you have various forms of townhouses up to mid-rise forms of development. And so if you think of the arterial roads across the city, that's really where the focus is. There's a higher level of transit service there. There are more community services. And so that's where the focus of a lot of this, of where the zoning is focused on. So I will, at the end of my portion of the presentation, just provide some locations or places to get more information. So just very quickly, a few upcoming initiatives. We are looking, I don't know if how many people are familiar with the BLAST network, so where the city plans to focus higher order transit in the future. And so there's a series of roads that are focus of that initiative. And so we have transit-oriented corridor zoning. It's essentially mixed use zoning with components of residential, commercial, institutional uses. And so we are looking to expand those opportunities to the BLAST network. That zoning right now is predominantly located along the LRT corridor in the city, in the lower city. And the final phase of the residential zones project. So working with our colleagues in sustainable communities to identify where the appropriate locations are for high-rise residential development. So there's a number of ways to reach out and to learn more. We do have a dedicated email address for the project at reszoning@hamilton.ca. We have a project website and our Engage Hamilton website. So project website just has all information on the project and where we are now. And when we are doing active engagement, you can find that information and ways to get involved on the Engage Hamilton website. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken to continue.
Oh, are we supposed to use this? Sorry, what did you set us up with? Does this work? Everyone can hear me? Great, thank you. Oh, I do. Can everyone hear me? Great, thank you. My name is Ken Coit, as Lana said. I'm the Director of Heritage and Urban Design in the Planning Department. My team deals with cultural heritage, so heritage designations, heritage permits, and heritage districts. I also am in charge of the urban design team, which comments on urban design across the city. The site plan team, which reviews the final planning applications before we go for building permit. And then, of course, our natural heritage team. So I've been asked to speak a bit about natural heritage tonight. So what is natural heritage? It's our urban forest. So those are our trees within the urban boundary across the city. Our wetlands, minor, major, many that are provincially designated across the city. Watercourses, small creeks, rivers, streams, woodlots, both urban and rural. Natural linkages, so linking these various features across the city, and of course working with biodiversity and how that how we reinforce that across the city. What's pictured here is a schedule from the official plan that shows a lot of those features mapped across the city. So how do we do some of this tree protection? How do we protect natural heritage? Specifically around trees, legislation such as tree cutting bylaws, of which there's one in Ancaster, and one in Stony Creek, and one in Dundas. We don't have a citywide one, but we're going to speak to that later. And tree protection guidelines that are that guide our review of new development and through Planning Act applications. The other way we do this is review of various studies that we ask for and require as part of a development application. So environmental impact statements, EISs, for environmentally significant areas that are mapped across the city and identified through various provincial and OP policy legislation. So those would be things such as wetlands. We have an advisory group, significant areas impact evaluation group, a number of experts in the city that volunteer their time to review these studies and help us decide things like buffers from important environmentally sensitive areas before we can build new development. Inventories of vegetation, landscape plans, what the applicant's actually proposing to do in terms of land, what their new planting is going to be, what planting is going to be saved. determination of feature limits. So that would be what I was saying, a buffer away from a stream or a protected area or a woodlot to make sure that the biodiversity and the environmental feature remains intact and can grow over time. A linkage assessment, so again, how these different things would be connected if a development is affecting that. Sub-watershed studies that look at flooding and the environmental features of watercourses across the city. And finally, through site plans, tree protection plan, in which an applicant will provide us with an analysis of all the trees on site, which trees are healthy, which trees are dead, which trees are invasive species, compare them to a new proposed landscape plan, and then talk about things like which ones we should try and save and which ones we should compensate for through the development. And as the councillor said, there's various ways to get involved. So we do have our policies and procedures and bylaws that we have to follow, but we also do work to update those. So presently, through the urban forest strategy, which has set us a goal to increase our tree canopy cover from 20 to 40% by 2050, we're working on updates to the tree protection bylaws, woodlot bylaws, and our policies that guide development trees on private land. And that will be coming out this fall. So we hope you all have a chance to go on the website and provide your comments. And that's the address where you can find more information. But that's it for me. And I think we're handing it over to Jen. You okay, Jen? Be careful with that foot. Jen damaged herself at the Arkells concert. Oops. Leave that to him.
Good evening, everyone. So Jennifer Caterino, Area Planning Manager for the West Development Team. So as Reno mentioned, development planning is split into East and West. My area is the West, which includes Ward 12 and Ancaster. My team is currently evaluating the official plan amendment at Wilson and Lorne. So right now we are working with the applicants on various things for the official plan amendment. We don't have a target date yet for a planning committee meeting. However, our senior planner, Yamna, is still accepting comments from the public. So you're welcome to reach out to her. Her information should be on the notice sign and all the material that is sent out to your groups. And if you don't have it, you can reach out to, I guess, Nancy, if you're okay with that. And then Nancy will get in touch with us and we'll connect you so we can accept comments. But just quickly, I think a lot of people in this room are pretty educated on the application. There is a bit of a planning process that occurred here, and a lot of it was tied up in the legislative changes with the province. So at this point in time, this site actually has approved zoning on the property. However, the official plan doesn't match. So before the applicant can proceed to Ken's team in the site plan, they need to get approval of an official plan, designation, and regulations to proceed. So that's the process they're going through now. And I apologize, this information is for the next application. But the reason for the official plan amendment at Wilson and Lorne is exactly that, so that the official plan can match the zoning that was approved by the Ontario Land Tribunal. So in that, we are, like I mentioned, working with the applicant to try to get some design tweaks to the site. The second application that people probably just heard about because it just came in is the one at 442 to 446 Wilson Street East at Wilson and Rousseau at the corner there. So this application has a similar history in terms of application process and approval. So I guess we can go back to the other slide. So on September 26, 2023, the OLT did approve a settlement that was reached by the city. The NEC's on here, but that stands for the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and the applicant regarding the proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. The official plan amendment application that they've submitted now is required because at the time the official plan amendment was approved through the settlement, the government not to get into all the stuff. But the government approved a number of bills, and through, if you hear reference to Bill 150, Bill 150 reverted some of the changes they had made through previous bills back. So then through that process, the official plan amendment that was approved through the settlement was null and void. So now we have a situation where the official plan doesn't match the zoning that was approved. And so they're going through the process to try to align the official plan and the zoning before a site plan application can be submitted. So this application is currently under review by staff. We are targeting, as of right now, September 9th planning committee date. This application is actually assigned to me right now. So please, if you have comments, email me, and me and the technician will answer your questions and log your comments. And this is the site plan that they've submitted. So they're proposing 7 stories, a bunch of terraces down. It's my understanding the plan is pretty similar to what was submitted previously. And that is my quick assessment of those 2 applications.
Oh, it's good. Bear with me a moment. I just want to make sure we stop recording. Okay.